Well, ladies and gentlemen, today I'm very, very privileged, and I mean that, to have with me one of the most awesome lawyers in American music history. It's the incredibly talented Mr. J.B. Ross. J.B., would you like to say hello to all of our listeners?
Absolutely. I'd love to say hello, and hello to you, Tony, and thank you for having me on.
So, J.B., your nickname is the Rapping Lawyer. Tell me about that.
Well, one of the things that I have always done as a lawyer in the entertainment business is I've attempted to go beyond the books and actually participate as a booking agent or as a manager. And the one thing I hadn't done was actually participate as a performer.
Mm-hmm.
So about 30 years ago, for a birthday party, I did a song as a joke to entertain my employees, and it was called Sue the Bastards. I said, well, we want to pick up rappers because we've been representing doo-woppers and, R&B'ers and all that. We want to pick up rappers, so why don't I call myself the Rapping Lawyer? So under another definition of the word rap.
That title stayed with you ever since that point, and it became kind of your handle of fame.
You may be right, but as far as the song is concerned, that's what's listed on YouTube.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, JB made a video which I've shared on my Facebook page, and I've got to tell you all, this is well worth looking at, and it's a rapping video with a lot of famous people in it. JB, how did you get all these people to come into your video?
They owed me favors.
I bet they did. So you had the famous Willie Dixon sitting on the bench of the Supreme Court doing her part. Who else did you have there?
Well, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is one of my all-time favorite performers, Gene Chandler, the Duke of Earl.
Yes.
Then I had a woman who made number 2 on the charts, Jackie Ross, who was famous for the song Selfish One.
Yes.
And she was on the court. And then we had my insurance man was there, and we needed his space, so he was on it. And Helen Wooten, who's a icon in the Chicago area. The only qualification is you had to, you couldn't be a teenager. You had to look a little older to be on the Supreme Court.
I was so impressed. But that video was really something very different than you would expect from a pretty serious and high-powered lawyer like yourself. Why don't you tell us about some of the artists that you've represented in your career?
Well, we represented a lot of the state of people who had passed on.
Yes.
And, of course, those are generally the easiest because there's no one to talk back to you. But as far as the artists that, I had developed a personal relationship with, James Brown is probably the best known. I was with him for 15 years.
That's a long time.
Oh, yeah.
It's a long time for working with someone like James Brown. As you know, I've just finished writing the book about Martha Hyde's life with him, and one gets the impression that it's difficult to stay with him for a long time, but you succeeded.
Well, he was always a gentleman with me. I saw him at his worst, but he never had spillover into our relationship. Mm-hmm. Generally, I always thought him to be a gentleman and a classy guy. Everybody has bad moments, especially when you got the kind of pressure on him that he had.
Yeah, of course. And I noticed in your interview with him, you called him what he likes to be called, which was always Mr. Brown.
He told me that the first time we met, that he likes to be called Mr. Brown. And I'm not unfamiliar with, because when Lawrence Tiro came to me 30, 40 years ago and said that he wanted to change his name legally, I changed his name legally to Mr. T.
Okay. Did he say why he wanted that name changed to Mr. T?
Yeah, respect.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. And I think that name, Mr. T, was a lot easier for people to recognize as the person. So it was a good move.
Very good move. And the ironic thing about it is, however, when I did see him after he had moved to Hollywood, I asked him, did it work? And there are still some people now who just call me T.
So even Mr. T isn't short enough for some people, isn't that funny?
Exactly.
It really is funny.
You never win.
When we spoke yesterday, you were telling me that you had many, many funny stories. And obviously some of them you can't repeat on public, but funny stories about people you've represented. What comes to mind, JB?
I told you yesterday I would tell you who James Brown modeled his career. Yeah, and we postponed it for today so you would hear it for the first time. Mr. Brown modeled his career, the way he conducted his group, everything, over one of the great icons who's almost totally forgotten nowadays in the industry, and that's Louis Jordan.
Wow. Well, now you say it, Louis Jordan was the consummate professional performer. I would never have thought that James Brown modeled himself after him. And what a move it was, wasn't it?
Louis Jordan conducted his band or orchestra the same way as Mr. Brown. The tremendous discipline involved. If they messed up on a note or something, they got fined. Just like Louis Jordan did, very, very tough disciplinarian because he wanted it right. They
were at the top of their game, so he should expect it to be right. It should be, in his eyes, the best performance that they'll ever see.
No question. My all-time favorite performer is Chuck Berry, and he used to tour. He would pick up a group in whatever town he was in, because everybody could play Chuck Berry songs.
Yeah.
And he would go on with that group. It was performed on a very rare and never to be repeated Jerry Springer show. He made the audience wait 3 hours until the sound system was correct. Because he was a perfectionist. If he was going to perform at national television, was going to be the best he could do.
So what about now you've done the estates of people like, was it Ray Charles?
Renee Robinson. Ray Charles's last name was Robbins. He just used his first two names in the show business. And his daughter Renee Robinson and I used to talk a lot. I represent some of the children of Jackie Wilson. We were trying to do some work for the children of Leadbelly.
Oh, my goodness, yeah.
28 of them.
28 children?
28, that's not the record. You know what the record is?
No, I don't, but 28 would be a record that I could imagine.
There's one guy who left souvenirs wherever he went.
Call them souvenirs. I bet the kids would love to be called souvenirs.
The guy with the most children of all that I know, a client that I only met once when he passed away, a guy named Screaming Jay Hawk.
How many souvenirs did he leave behind?
56.
Oh, my goodness. That's more than one in every state.
Absolutely.
That is.
He could have become the new Rothschild.
You've got to either be incredibly rich or incredibly clever to keep ahead of all of that and not end up paying alimony in the millions every year. So what are the sort of things that you get involved with, JB, on the legal side? What sort of issues do you deal with?
Well, for current artists, the main thing deals with record contracts, some of the newer contracts for streaming and distribution over the internet, stuff like that, management agreements. Then there's promoters. We do the contract with the venue. You asked me for funny stories before. As I say, it's because you can't really learn from everything from the books. Yeah, one of my experiences, I was a promoter for a show, and our guest star for the show was somebody who had a reputation of being not always the easiest guy to get along with, Jerry Lee Lewis.
Oh, yes.
And when he got there, the first thing that he did after he went into the dressing room of this venue we rented, there were no towels in the dressing room.
Mm-hmm.
And if we didn't have towels, within the next 5 minutes in the dressing room, he was grabbing a cab, going to the airport, and going to split.
Wow.
It was my first promotion. And we didn't realize that the venue wouldn't have towels. So my partner was a genius. So within 5 minutes, I saw him walk in with 20 towels. I said, Louis, we're out nowhere. I said, where the hell did you get 20 towels? Are you ready for the answer?
Go on.
Oh, I stopped an ambulance.
He stopped an ambulance and took the towels from them. Oh, my goodness.
Stopped an ambulance and got the towels.
That's a great story.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever. I mean, that's the story of thinking from outside of the box.
Absolutely. And sometimes you obviously have to do that. Coming back to the legal side, one question that's been burning in the minds of many, many artists now. We have now internet streaming, as you mentioned before, with Spotify and other things. Do you feel that the clients do get a fair shake of this with the breakdown of the money? Because it's impossible to see how many downloads and how much has been done. It's not something you can easily see. With this now, it's very difficult. What do you think?
Well, I definitely think that the artist is being taken advantage of, as they have always been taken advantage of.
Yes.
There was a guy from Chicago who started MCA, Music Corporation of America, which is now a record company, part of Universal. And allegedly his philosophy was steal from all the artists. 9 out of 10 of them won't do anything. Have a lot of lawyers, and on the 10th one, you eventually settle, and you'll make twice as much money. And I think a lot of record companies have adopted that philosophy.
Yeah.
One guy I dealt with from Capitol Records really cared about the artist. Dinah Washington's husband, the football player, Night Train Lane, had sold out her royalties that she was getting from EMI. And they are making millions as a result of that. And so I asked them, how's about helping this artist and her family out? And he did it.
Wow.
He increased her royalty to 10%. And he started paying, and we still collect royalties thanks to them. Polygram, who had the same deal, did not do it.
No. I know recently, well, not so recent now, we heard that Northern Records was bought out by Michael Jackson, and I don't know how the hell that happened, secretly without Paul McCartney knowing, but I remember him being advised of this, and he was furious that it had gone. And it just struck me as odd that, you don't have a legal team around you that keeps an eye on things like this, that something like that can happen, and you lose all your early music to an estate which is already very wealthy, and a lot of the early songs are played thousands and thousands of times a year. What would be your advice to, say there's an artist coming up now, how do they deal with this? Do they go independent? How do they do this?
You got to have people who are knowledgeable, a team essentially, working with you. I remember Sid Seidenberg. I don't know if you knew Sid.
No, I know the name, but
Sid was an accountant. He absolutely fell in love with the guitar playing talents of a blues singer. The blues singer's name was Riley King. That was it.
Okay.
And he decided to give up his accounting job and become Riley King's manager. Well, the first thing he did was tell Riley to change his name, something more glamorous. So they called Riley from that time on Blues Boy King, which eventually became shortened to BB.
BB King, yes. Very good.
King.
Yeah.
And he created the BB King nightclubs, and he created the BB King disc. Instead of just having him be a blues star, he got him on sitcoms. And so when BB and I were talking once, I referred to him as the king of the blues. He said, no, your client, Muddy Waters, is the real king of the blues.
So Muddy Waters was your client as well?
Oh, yeah. He was the first guy who hired me in my 20s.
That's actually very astute of him to realize at that point that being a musician wasn't enough. If you want to keep going, you've got to protect your talent.
Well, Brian Epstein did the same thing with the Beatles.
That's right.
A good manager or a good support team in general can be fabulous. But you got to watch out. There are sharks all over the place in this business. And a lot of the people associated with Mr. Brown, at least I think a couple of them, went to jail.
Well, yesterday when we talked pre the interview, I mentioned to you that a very good friend of mine, someone that I've sung with, was one of the founder members of the Stylistics, and his name is Wesley Stevens. He wrote many of their songs when he was 15, and he was living with his grandmother. When he joined the band, he was a very, very prolific songwriter. And by the way, JB, he taught synthesizer at Juilliard. I mean, how good do you have to be a teacher at Juilliard? But when he wrote the songs, he never got a dime from those. At 15, you don't know what you don't know, do you?
It's very tough, and I must tell you, I get people coming into me all the time that said, well, 30 years ago I did this and that, and I stopped him. I said, you had to wait 30 years to see a lawyer? He said, well, I was busy,
And it's a bit daunting, I think, for many artists.
So I don't think it's that much of a big move, but I appreciate what you're saying, man. Thank you.
You told me yesterday about the daughter of a harmonica player.
We had a girl who was not a product of the marriage, and there was no will or anything, and one of the great harmonica players. And she came to me and said, I've been 30 years since my daddy died, and I've never gotten a penny on anything. And I said, well, in law, they have a thing called laches, L-A-C-H-E-S. And laches is a Latin word that means essentially you waited too long. In other words, if Abraham Lincoln's great-great-grandchildren wanted to sue and say, hey, you're using our great-great-grandfather's image on a $5 bill and we're not getting anything for it, the courts would say you waited too long. You know what I mean?
So did that apply to her?
Well, we thought it would, but we thought we'd take the chance. So we filed suit, and the lawyer that'd been around in the days of Chicago's Record Row and stuff like that, and he did not assert the defense of laches on the trial level. So we brought in our two witnesses. One was 100 years old.
Oh, my God.
The other was 102. Testified, yes, this particular musician did introduce this lady when she was a girl to us as his daughter, and the judge bought it and disenfranchised the sisters and gave the money to the daughter. Well, they appealed, and they brought up laches on appeal. Well, the appellate court said, no, you got to bring it up on the trial level. You're too late. We're going to affirm the case. And so the first thing that happened was his daughter, who never had a penny, who was on welfare, everything else, was offered $750,000 by the publishing company to keep the publishing with them.
What a result.
Yeah.
That's got to be when you feel great about what you're doing, when you're protecting the rights of someone like that. But it's funny that the age law didn't work in favor because they brought the age law in too late. That's really poetic justice, isn't it?
Well, there's all sorts of tricks and scraps in the legal system. That's why you need lawyers,
Yeah. Well, that was part one of my fascinating interview with the late and great J.B. Ross. Hope you enjoyed it.